We have some pretty nice food, isn't it? The white choice, Sri Lankan, Thai, Aussie, Vietnamese, Chinese, Bangladesh. Have you ever seen a white wallaby?
I saw the video Ajahn uploaded last night.
I just saw the video. Because we have a white wallaby, Seto. Seto simply means white in Pali, and he has been around for a few years. He is usually very shy. The females tend to get a little bit more tame, but the male wallabies, they usually just hop away when you get anywhere close. I once tried to take at least a photo because it's quite special. I've never seen a white one. It's not 100% white, he's not an albino. He doesn't have reddish eyes and he has a few patches, a little bit grey-brown, but almost white. And I thought it's quite special, so I wanted to take a photo. But the photo never turned out nice because he's so far away, you can't really recognize whether he's white or anything. But recently he had a kickboxing argument with another wallaby. And I came along the ridge on top, which is my daily commute. I often feel very happy when I'm commuting to work in the morning. Because I think many of you may be having an hour's drive and standing in the traffic jam. Whereas I have a 5-minute walk along the ridge at Dhammagiri. And in winter, under the beautiful dawn and later sunrise, sometimes the mist is still in the valleys and the gullies, and on top we are above it. So I often rejoice when I consider how lucky I am that this is my commute, just 5 minutes walk in beautiful nature. And just when I came to the header tank, the water tank we have on top, he was fighting with this other fellow, and they virtually ignored me. I'm not sure they even noticed me, but if they noticed me, they just didn't bother. Because they were mostly concerned in their animosity to the other guy. And so I could get quite close, and I even could get my phone out, which takes quite a long time. I'm not normally using it for either photo or videos, or I'm not very skillful. I fiddled around a long time, but they were still going. And I thought it was a good opportunity to introduce others to Seto. Our webmaster, Gary got a bit concerned that this is too violent for a Buddhist website. But there's at least no visible injury or harm. I'm not sure whether they can cause any internal injury or broken ribs. I think the kangaroos can hurt each other quite badly with the kicks. But they were still going at it the next day, so I think they can't have been hurt too badly. And the point is not anyhow to just represent nature as an idealistic, photoshopped version of nature, because nature is by nature quite brutal and competitive. And of course, as Buddhist monks, starting with the Buddha and the great Ajahns, we are often taking great delight in the beauty of nature. That aspect is certainly there. But once we investigate what the life of animals is actually like, it's not necessarily like some cute little cuddly pet, but it's often eating and getting eaten, and brutal competition. The video was also meant to be a little educational. My original idea was to put some Dhamma teaching in the background, because the original sound wasn't very good. One could hear the hustling sound from the wind. It was a windy morning, so one couldn't hear very properly. And I thought, no, okay, so we just have it silent and put a different audio track. And as I have my German accent, I wanted to ask our native American speaker to read out some nice Dhamma teaching, the Kalaha Vivada Sutta from Sutta Nipata, the quarrels and dispute, where the Buddha is analyzing their quarrels and disputes actually coming from. What is the underlying cause? What is the condition that animals and humans end up fighting, quarreling, arguing, and going to war? There's other suttas, Attadanda, and particularly Maha Dukkha Kanda, the discourse on the great mass of suffering. But the other monks convinced me that it would be a little bit, how to say, not fully appropriate or slightly disrespectful to the Dhamma, and if you give a very profound quote from the Buddha on top of the two kangaroos kickboxing, it feels a little bit not 100% appropriate. So I let go of that and I just put some natural Dhammagiri sounds into the video, and I managed to preserve some of the sound. You can hear when they knock over our rain gauge. This is original soundtrack. And I have to be honest, I sneaked in the Indian cuckoo. Did you hear the cuckoo?
I was a bit surprised. I said, oh, there's this bird in the background. I knew it's here, but
The bird, the cuckoo is fake. The cicada and the kookaburras are actually really recorded here, although not exactly at that moment. But the Cuculus micropterus, Indian cuckoo, I put in additionally. Because the voice of the Indian cuckoo in Pali is considered to be extremely beautiful, to the extent that the Buddha is described as Karavika Bani, speaking with a voice as sweet as an Indian cuckoo. So this is why I once downloaded from some free distribution. But I at least gave a reference to the discourse on the great mass of suffering in the description, although I'm not sure whether people actually read the description of YouTube videos.
yeah, I had a look. I usually look what it was for, and it was for
Oh.
some of the attraction that causes the problem, and that everyone would fight with each other.
Exactly. Because now what are they fighting over? The two male wallabies? It's about the female wallabies. No? This is where it all comes from. And if we analyze what are the underlying causes and conditions for conflict, we find that sensual desire and attachment and craving is usually involved. There can be exceptional situations where someone has such strong hatred that it's just now out of pure hatred that they attack someone. But much more common is that it's some conflict about something which both of them want. Now, whether it's an attractive partner, I think there can be quite a bit of fighting in both directions, also among females, about an attractive partner. Or whether it's money, now this is fighting over the promotion at work, fighting over who gets the job, who gets kicked out. Because if you're promoted, then you have more money, and then the money provides us with the ability to indulge whatever desires we want to use it for. And I think this is not so clear to many people. If we teach the Dhamma, usually, particularly in the lay community, they are very responsive to the teaching about abandoning anger and abandoning hatred and aversion. And we have the three roots of the unwholesome, usually translated as greed, hatred and delusion. And the one about hatred, anger, aversion, and most people agree that this is some unwholesome, bad thing, and they agree that is something we should abandon and let go of. And one can easily see that in one's own experience. Anger doesn't feel pleasant. It actually feels very unpleasant. At the moment when we can let go of anger, grudge, aversion, we immediately feel uplifted, and the burden drops off the heart. So this is usually relatively easy to teach. It's not necessarily easy to do, at least to get general agreement on it, and people are receptive. But the teaching which actually the Buddha puts on number one, abandoning sensuality, abandoning sensual desire, abandoning the craving and attachment, this is something where many people are not so happy about hearing that, because sensual desire, if we have some means to satisfy it, if we can indulge in sensuality, it can feel very sweet. This is exactly why the Buddha mentioned that on the side of anger, if we act based on anger, hatred, aversion, there's often very bad karma. One can make a very heavy bad karma very quickly by hurting others, maybe even killing or at least harming, inciting, based on anger. And there's usually quite a bit of bad karma. Whereas if someone buys 1 kilogram Nutella and just gobbles it all down, it may not be so healthy, but it's not really bad karma. One isn't really harming other beings. One is only harming oneself, not to some extent. So usually on the side of anger, aversion, the big danger is that one can easily make lots of bad karma. Whereas on the side of desire, sensuality, indulgence, there's usually not really so much bad karma, and if one can keep it within the 5 precepts, then one can indulge quite a bit without really making bad karma. But on the other hand, it is much easier to abandon anger. The Buddha clearly declared that, simply because it feels bad. And once we notice that anger is actually hurting myself more than anyone else, and right in the beginning, and I'm just putting a burden on my own mind, and I harbor a grudge, and then one has a strong motivation for letting go of the anger. But with sensual desire, it can feel so sweet. This is why the Buddha said it's much more difficult to abandon. It's much harder. It takes much longer training and practice to let go of desire, passion. And many people don't even want to let go of it, because they say, what's the problem? But one problem is we get into conflict. And that is on the individual level, in families, kids, who gets a better room in the house, only that can cause conflict. There's a limited number of rooms. There's a limited number of promotions. There's a limited number of jobs. And due to desire and craving, many people want to have it. I remember when I studied economics, teaching that right in the beginning, human desires or needs are unlimited. There's basically no limitation to human desire and needs. whereas resources are limited. So you will always have a mismatch, at least in the human world. It's a bit easier in Devaloka. In the human world there's always a mismatch between the desires of all these humans and the resources which are available to fulfill them. Whether it's money, houses, attractive partners, and cars, enjoyments, fame. Not everyone can be a celebrity, it wouldn't work. Only a few can be the big celebrities. Only one person can be the president or the prime minister or the CEO. And many want to get there due to desire. So thus we always have this mismatch in the human world between our wishes, desires and needs and the resources available to satisfy them. You will always end up with competition, even if it's not an outright fighting, at least competition. And that is a drawback of sensuality, which the Buddha points out in that sutta, which I think that many people are not aware of. And what is very nice, very handy, if we practice to abandon sensual desire, the natural result of that is that we will also have less conflict. If you just had Pesach, did you see our Bodhi tree? Did your son show you around?
Not yet. He's
There
still
you
showing
are.
me my dad.
Please show the Bodhi tree. Now this is a sacred symbol for us Buddhists, because the Buddha meditated under this kind of tree all night when he attained Sambodhi, when he attained awakening, perfect enlightenment. And he didn't meditate only that night, he basically lived under that tree. And that was his shelter, his home, so to speak. He's in the homeless life, but that is the temporary shelter. But you can imagine if you're sitting under a tree and then someone else comes and they want to sit under the tree as well. Would you make a big fuss? Would you go for war for sitting under that particular tree? Somewhat unlikely, no? There's many trees around, so you just sit under a different tree because you can have it. And the person wouldn't probably even try in the first place to expel you from your tree because there's enough trees. So that lifestyle means that you're not easily getting into conflict with anyone. It's the same with the robes the monks are wearing. What the monks in the Buddha's time often would do, they would just collect rags. They see some abandoned old piece of cloth which someone had thrown away. Sometimes even in the charnel ground, the shrouds which they have wrapped the corpses in. And after the corpses in ancient India, they were just abandoned there. They were not necessarily being buried. It was just an abandoned property. And then the monks would come and they would get these shrouds wrapped around the corpse, and they would boil it for a few hours to get it completely sterile, and then they would dye it, and then they would sew patchwork ropes out of it. Do you think you get into a big conflict with anyone trying to take away your patchwork back rope made out of shrouds wrapped around corpses? No, no one wants that kind of stuff. And then dye it in some brownish color, not some beautiful blue or green or red, and just a very plain brownish color. Now alms food, just going in the village, and whatever people put into the bowl. And when you go out of the village, with your bowl now filled with all these different spoons full of different kind of food, In a famine, someone may still try to steal that, but for example, in a society like Australia, no one would be interested in fighting over that. So it's a fascinating lifestyle where you're not only abandoning sensuality, but where you're at the same time also reducing the underlying causes of conflict. And you can live in a very peaceful life. You're out of the competition. It's the same with a celibate lifestyle. What I remember, and back in lay life, once I remember this one girl going out with her, and she looked very attractive. It was a very stressful situation. I mean, they're creeping up, the guys are creeping up from all directions. And it's really amazing. And the moment you are living the celibate life, you're completely out of that. Now, how much in lay life is about attracting a partner? I mean, even the promotion, the money, the position, the car, will be more for the males. And it's ultimately about that thing, that you're in the competition for attracting an attractive partner. A lot of that is the underlying motivation. And then again you get into conflict. So in the celibate life there's also an advantage that this whole area of conflict is completely taken out. And if one lives in this traditional monk's life, just under a tree, mendicant, subsisting on alms food, celibate, and not having money, makes life so much easier. Can you imagine? It looks like life must be very difficult without money, but this is what most people think. I think that owning money will make life much more difficult. I remember an old friend from school. He visited me in Sri Lanka when I lived in Nisarana. He was even very willing to keep the 8 precepts and so on. He wasn't really a Buddhist. But that was just the deal. If he wanted to visit me in the monastery, he's obviously happy to try it out. But we also went out for an outing. And I wanted to introduce him to Bhikkhu Bodhi, because it's a nice hermitage those days in Kandy, and he can speak English very well and he could relate to him. So we hired a 3-wheeler, one of these tuk-tuk scooters. And that was from Kirindivela, close to Colombo, all the way to Kandy. So it's obviously a very expensive trip for the tuk-tuk driver. And Kirindivela is not actually on the tourism track. And so when we too turned up, and we went to these tuk-tuk drivers, and once they got the idea and we want to hire someone all the way to Kandy and back, they were obviously expecting the huge profits now. I guess the battery is empty. My best guess. And I think we probably can't. We just leave it. There's nothing we can do right now. And of course, because I was a monk in a Buddhist country, where a monk has a very high social status. In Australia it's the opposite. I notice when I go with my father around in Australia, everyone talks to my father. Although his English is not that good, but I just look so weird. Took me a while to figure that out, and I was wondering, why don't they like to talk to me? Why do they want to talk to my father who can't speak English so well? Till I realized it's because of this. In Sri Lanka it's the opposite. There's a monk, and obviously everyone talks to me, and I spoke a little bit of Sinhalese. And then there came this whole haggling. They obviously wanted lots of money now to get us to Kandy. However, once I communicated to them in Sinhalese that I have no money at all. I'm a monk who is practicing it strictly. I have no money. This is the guy with the money. Not Venerable Bodhisattva, but my friend. My friend is the guy with the money, and once they got that, I was in perfect peace. I was just standing there, and no one had any interest in me anymore. And I could just stand and I would watch my friend Matthew being surrounded by this crowd of tuk-tuk drivers who were all trying to haggle and get the deal. And I reflected on it and I thought, yeah, the Buddha is a very wise person. And he knew how he can get the monks out of conflict, out of trouble, and by something as simple as not having money. All the conmen in this world, the ones they know as a Buddhist monk, if you don't have money, they're just not in your life anymore. If you don't have, you may have noticed your first day, do we have a bouncer at the gate? Do you have to get past the bouncer somehow, convince them? If you don't have that, and it's not necessary, because, for example, violent people, they're usually not interested in what we're doing here. They just don't come. The similar people who are very egoistic, who just want to make a quick buck. But they very quickly notice now, how can you make a quick buck out of an organization where everyone comes to give Dhamma and is generous. So this fascinating kind of selection, and once you live a life as a Buddhist monk and you don't really have money, a whole range of materialist, egoistic people you virtually have no interaction with. And I was so impressed now, almost anywhere I go, when I travel and I arrive at the airport, and straight away you meet maybe some of the best and most good-hearted people maybe in that whole city. It's an incredible privilege, living that lifestyle. So we can do that to some extent even in lay life. The more content we are, the more we develop contentment, the less conflict. You may think it's great if I had 50,000 followers on my Twitter or 100,000 on your Instagram. Once you have that, you will notice all the envy, all the jealousy. You may think it would be great to be a billionaire. But I remember once reading about the guy who is informing people when they win the jackpot in the lotto. Because if it's really high, they have someone personally going and informing people. And this particular one would usually give them advice. And when people win a huge amount, he would actually usually advise them not really to tell it. I think, which I couldn't say as a Buddhist monk, he basically recommended them to lie and to say, I think it has to be less than 500,000. It's already a few years back. So if you say that you won 2, 3, 400,000 in the lotto, that explains why you're suddenly doing this expensive cruise, or why you're getting a new car. Because the people get very curious and interested, and it's odd. So you have an explanation why you can do these things, but it's below the threshold where you can still keep your friends. When you win 50 million, it will put a huge strain on all your relationship and all the friendships, because people can't handle it. Some are jealous, others try to get something from you. So he even recommended it not to tell that you want so much money, because immediately you're attracting all the hangers-on, you're attracting jealousy, envy, you're attracting the people who are pretending that they like you just because they want something from you. Whereas if you live a simple life with contentment, all that is not going to happen. it really struck me. I must admit I have stayed in some luxury hotels as a monk, and that was in India on this pilgrimage, because it's sometimes very, very difficult, and particularly when we had this school pilgrimage, and I tried my best to stay in a very simple place, but we ended up into a hotel with several stars, because there was no other really good option. And obviously, particularly in India, the staff is incredibly polite and friendly, because it's very difficult to get into that job. It's incredible competition to get a job in this luxury hotel. And when we went, let's say, for the meal, and everyone is just so sweet and so friendly and so polite and so respectful. But as a Buddhist monk, I could immediately notice a difference, that this was only based on money. It was only superficial, it was only part of their job. Because normally I don't have that. The people who come here, they're actually really friendly, and they really like to practice generosity, and they really enjoy it. Because there's no point in pretending anything. Why would you come here? You come here only if you really want to do good things. And as a Buddhist monk, I'm constantly used to that very genuine friendliness and good-heartedness, almost all the time. So that for me, I could immediately see the difference. And they may have had a little bit nicer smile even than the people coming to practice generosity, because they don't have this training to be continuously smiling and so on. But it was totally obvious that the heart attitude wasn't there. And if you're rich or famous or powerful, you will get that all the time, the fake one. And after some time you don't really know it anymore. And you can't distinguish even the fake and the not. There's all drawbacks. And then the worst is that you are attracting jealousy, envy, craving. Now the Buddha gave powerful similes. He says sensuality, sensual pleasures, is just like you have a little piece of meat, and then you throw it through a swarm of crows. What's going to happen? The one crow will grab that piece of meat, and what will the other crows do? They're trying to go after and take it away, and there's a huge ball. In Mitrigala we had that with the monkeys. There's an awful ball, and if you put some food out, the way they fight about it. And this is quite a powerful simile for sensuality and for possessions. And people don't consider that. They think I will be so happy, everything is good, and if I have so much stuff, and all the other crows will go after you. And it doesn't bring much satisfaction anyhow. Another simile the Buddha used is a butcher. And the butcher is scraping off the meat from a bone. The skillful Indian butcher, they have very limited resources, so you can imagine that there is no meat left on that bone, and he finally throws it away to the dogs. Now one of the dogs gets this bone without any meat, but still some traces of blood and still a smell. And this hungry dog, you must have seen maybe dogs in India, often very quite emaciated, a little bit sickly, hungry. And now this dog starts gnawing and chewing on this bone, and the beautiful fragrance of meat. Will the dog get much nourishment from that big bone without any meat? Oh no, he's chewing, trying to get something out of it, but never getting any real satisfaction. And that is a simile for sensual pleasures. Here in a country like Australia, I'm sure all of you had your share in sensual pleasures, nice meals, parties, good food. Are you satisfied now? Do you feel I have no desire anymore because I had all this? Doesn't work like that, no? And it's like a fire and it just becomes more. And it's like the dog, no one is chewing there, and it doesn't really satisfy, it just makes it worse. Before he started chewing that bone, the hunger was probably less. But once he gets, there's always this fragrance, this promise, but then nothing much not to get out of it. So a few reflections I'd like to offer today on the theme of abandoning attachment to sensuality, abandoning the craving, abandoning the desire for possessions, money, riches, because it will also automatically mean that we live more peaceful and that we have much less conflict. And any society where contentment is practiced, they will have less conflict and more peace and harmony. And any society where everyone is running like crazy after their desires, they will automatically have more conflict. And it also works now on the large scale, even wars between countries. And if we analyze where wars come from, once you know this analysis, you'll be smart now and you will not so easily buy into the propaganda. Because when a country goes to war, propaganda is always part of it, and they will always present it. The other country, this is always worse than Hitler. And the guy in charge in the other country, he's always a real Hitler. This is always a propaganda behind it. But if you analyze more deeply, you look, is that guy really like Hitler, or is it maybe more the resources they want from that country? Is it maybe more an economic competition? And if you analyze like that, you will easily recognize what is often the true causes of wars and conflict there. It's not necessarily what is presented. And it's the same, it's about craving, it's about getting resources, it's about the markets, it's about oil, it's about land, acquiring more land. So as it works on the individual level, so we can also make the world more peaceful on the larger scale. Any comments or questions?
With sensual desire, so it includes food, craving for food, and I have to admit I enjoy eating. And I also enjoy like preparing food, but also sharing food. And then I have another question. I hope it's not inappropriate. So first of all, like as a layperson, is it still okay to enjoy food? And then the question that I'm a bit hesitant in, you as a monk, are you allowed to enjoy food? Like, I think a lot of the food that is prepared here, we're trying to bring good food, and of course everyone has to eat to sustain themselves, but there's also some enjoyment, and my question is, what is allowed?
There's an interesting question about food, talking about sensuality. Someone very frankly and honestly admitted that they enjoy eating good food. I'm sure you're not the only one. And whether this is okay or whether this is already wrong, and in particular also for monks, whether monks are actually allowed to enjoy food. I wish it was so easy to disallow that. if the Buddha had said, no, it is no longer allowed to enjoy food, how do you do that? So there's no rule that you can't enjoy food, but there's an encouragement that one should practice to eat not for the purpose of enjoyment or pleasure or looking athletic or looking attractive, but simply for the maintenance and nourishment of this body, to be able to live the holy life, to practice a spiritual path. So that is the instruction. So ideally a monk would eat only for that purpose. But unless you have a very deep samadhi or already on the third stage of enlightenment and anagami, inevitably there will be some enjoyment and liking arising in the mind. So the point is not to be, first of all, at least aware of that for monks. But for monks the expectation is at least that one makes an effort in that direction. This is one reason that we are usually eating separate. Sometimes people may wonder that the monks are sitting there in the shrine room in the aircon and they have to sit outside with the flies and the heat. Why don't they invite us all in? But in general there's a very different attitude in eating. I noticed when I visited my father, so sometimes we also eat together then. And in German it's common before you start eating, you wish each other good appetite. So Father very consistently is wishing me good appetite. And I try to explain him that I'm actually trying to do the opposite. The whole idea would be not to eat because of appetite, because of trying to enjoy it, but only like you take medicine. When you have sickness and they prescribe you some antibiotics, you usually don't enjoy taking them and you don't eat more of this medicine because it tastes nicer or it has a nicer color, but you follow the prescription. Now, this is the idea and attitude for the monks or nuns to eat, and that would be the ideal attitude even for a lay practitioner. However, you may want to practice in that area which is the most important one, and the enjoyment of food within the 5 precepts is a pretty harmless one, particularly if you don't eat too much. The first thing one can do is knowing the right measure. You may not be able to abandon enjoyment in eating, this is extremely difficult, but what you can do, at least to keep it to the measure which is healthy. And you can also pick the food which is healthy rather than the comfort food. Now this is a good practice. And then don't worry so much, at least you're aware that there's still this desire, this appetite, and you already have awareness of that and you practice to slowly abandon that. But at least you know the limit. That is a more realistic goal to start with. And you don't have to be worried about enjoying sharing food, because sharing food is certainly something very good and wholesome. So it's a great area to practice with food. If you really want to go into it as a lay person, you can just contemplate what is called ahara patikula sanya, to see the disgusting quality in food. Because even the most attractive food, once you take it into your mouth, and maybe do the experiment and take it out again, is there anything left of that attractiveness? That is even taking it out of your own mouth. If you don't want to talk about someone doing the kind service for you of pre-chewing your food, so that you don't have to do all this hard work of chewing, you probably wouldn't appreciate that service. But even ourselves, just in the mouth, you're not talking taking it out of the stomach, just talking about taking it out of the mouth again, and it's all gone. And if you're eating too much, if you do this very simple exercise, that you eat as normal, you chew, and before you swallow, you take it out and look at it, and then after that you can swallow it. And I would be pretty sure that with this exercise alone, you would eat much, much less. And it would take all the fun out of eating already. This is why no one is doing it. I don't want to go too much into it because some people may not come back anymore to Dhammagiri. Go on too long about ahara pratikula sanya. What happens with food? What is the end product of food? This is why Dhammagiri, we have all this food, and we also have the toilets here. Just getting one more toilet, and these two things are connected. And if we contemplate the nature of the human body is basically transforming, in your lifetime, you're transforming one big wagon or truck of nice food into one big truck of septic stuff. This is what this body is doing over a lifetime. This is what sustains this body, a transformation process from attractive food into the excrement what goes into the toilet. And once you contemplate like that, now you'll start getting less interested in eating. I think often in lay life that is not the main practice, because often the emphasis is on keeping 5 precepts and developing generosity, developing good karma, and abandoning anger and aversion, keeping the 5 precepts. But if you're really aiming for samadhi, you may not get around that one. Because in order to let go of sensuality sufficiently that the mind can actually realize samadhi, it doesn't work if this craving is still there. But you may want to decide what is an important area for you. For example, not in your case, and I'm pretty sure you'll be keeping 5 precepts very diligently, but say a person who is not keeping the 5 precepts, and now they're making an effort in trying to not enjoy food. I think it would be much more fundamental and more important to first establish the 5 precepts, not to kill, not to steal, not to commit sensual misconduct, not to lie, not to take alcohol or intoxicants. These things may be more fundamental. Yes.
The monk said, so many things, and do they get attached to food? That's the only.
Do monks get attached to food? I can't speak for all monks. I'm certainly attached to food. I'm not an anagami or anything. Basically, the attachment to food is abandoned, truly abandoned at the level of non-return, 3rd stage of enlightenment. Before that, you would be fooling yourself if you think you have no attachment to food. The question is how strong it is. And in that sense, I sometimes feel there's maybe some success in the practice. Again, I remember calling my family, and I was sometimes surprised how much they're talking about food. There's amongst us monks, and it's not usually much of a subject. And that is maybe an indication that it's already some effect of the training. So my hope would be that it's a little bit less important to me than to many people. But to completely abandon the attachment to kabalinkara, ahara, edible food, the first of the 4 nutriment, that is accomplished only on the level of non-returning, 3rd stage of enlightenment. But in a place like here, it will be very difficult to abandon attachment to food because we get such nice, attractive food. But we also get quite healthy food. Usually you notice that only in the ones you're really starving how strong the attachment is. Attachment to food is not whether you pick the brown rice or the red rice or the white rice, or whether you take the orange juice or the apple juice. Now, this is just an appetite, but the attachment to food is really, if you feel weak, you're really hungry, and you notice that your body is harmed, and that if you don't eat, you may die. This is when you really experience attachment to food. And this is when all cultures people have become cannibals, because that craving is also powerful. In all famines we have that happening. One problem is in a society of affluence like ours, the people never experience hunger, they only know appetite. But already the 8 precepts can be quite helpful. Not eating after 12, you usually have some genuine little bit of hunger in the evening already, and it's a good way to notice how strong that is. Yeah.
Two quick questions. One is, if we want to substitute in something to enjoying food or wanting more or something like that, if we want to substitute something to reduce that, how should we do mindfully? What's your advice to
So how do we substitute if we don't want to enjoy food? And thanks so much for the question, because that is a technique the Buddha advises. If you only try to abandon all sensuality and you don't get some other better happiness, you're unlikely to succeed. It would require an incredible commitment and willpower. So what the Buddha recommends is rather replacing the joy which you normally get in lay life from all kinds of sensual indulgences with some other happiness which is superior and in line with Dhamma. And the best for that is obviously samadhi. And even if someone is not samadhi, is not an anagami on the third stage of enlightenment, if they have very good samadhi, they may also be able to lose all interest in food, at least temporarily. It's not yet complete, but someone with very good samadhi, they will have lost interest in food as well. But it can come back if they lose the samadhi. So the rapture and bliss of samadhi is the best one for abandoning sensuality. So it goes in both directions. Unfortunately, abandoning sensuality is also kind of a necessary condition for attaining samadhi. But then vice versa, once a person has samadhi, then it's also very easy. They don't need this sensual satisfaction anymore anyhow. But in practice, it's a gradual training in little steps. And you can start already with the happiness from giving. So for example, you bake a nice cake, and then you give it to someone else. And then you just enjoy that others have something nice to eat. And the joy may be so big that you're quite happy and you're not even so particularly keen on eating yourself. Some people are like that. They're cooking for others, and then they may not even join eating, but they're just very happy and they see everyone happy. And so the joy of giving and the joy of keeping precepts, but particularly the joy of samadhi. And it's gradual, it's not immediate in a full samadhi, but getting some happiness and contentment in your meditation, and straight away all these other sensual desires now reduced, because you notice you have some happiness already inside. So thanks so much for that question.
Ajahn, your story about the wallabies brought back a memory that I have from many years ago. In the 1980s, there was a Christian priest who was detained in the Middle East and tortured because they thought that he was a spy. And later when he came back to England, he was interviewed by the BBC, and he said that I can't see any other being, any animal, being so violent and cruel, because this was, I'm thinking now, that it was a illusion, it was a fixed view that caused this suffering, because they had nothing to get off in, there was no personal anger, it was just because they had a different view. think my feeling is that holding on to fixed views can cause much bigger violence than greed and hatred.
Someone was sharing a story of someone who had been tortured and later reported that this incredible violence, worse than any animal would do, was basically based on wrong views and delusion. And I agree, I mean, I totally agree that this is an important area for conflict and war, but I don't think we would have enough time to go into it. But clinging to views, attachment to views, and particular harmful and wrong views and ideologies and doctrines is certainly a tremendous source for conflict as well. Yeah. So I have to acknowledge that, and even if you abandon sensuality, you may still get into conflict on the level of views. And the Buddha pointed out there's even a certain danger in that amongst, not only monks and nuns, but amongst any kind of ascetic tradition and spiritual practitioners. Once they abandon all these material and spiritual interests, the clinging to views and opinions can become even stronger. Because if the faculty of craving, clinging is no longer directed to material things, it can simply be substituted by clinging to views, opinions, doctrines, isms, Marxism, fascism, Leninism, whatever. So I totally agree, but I think it would be too wide a subject to go into that. But once we abandon, or even at the same time when we work to abandon sensuality, we also have to contemplate and work working with abandoning and letting go of views and opinions. Okay, and last one.
I was just going to say, going back to the first story that Ajahn was talking about, the two kangaroos fighting.
Wallabies fighting.
The wallabies, sorry, the wallabies fighting. I was thinking, under normal circumstances, Ajahn said, they are quite shy and they would stay quite far away from us. But because they are deep in fighting, they lost guard of every danger from the outside. So I was thinking, like, for our own practice as well too, when we normally know about keeping the sila, we know about the karma and everything, but when we are deep into this very unwholesome mind state, we lose guard of everything and we create more. And so that's the danger that I was thinking of. From what Ajahn described with the story, how the wallabies forget that there's another being approaching. And that happened to be Ajahn, which is, you don't have a gun. It could be a hunter.
Yes, they would be in trouble.
And they could be dead.
Someone is pointing out the great danger, like the wallabies being unable to recognize me as a potential danger, or as a monk I'm not a danger, it could have been a hunter or something. And the same can happen to us. And I totally agree with you. It's basically what we call an immigrant samadhi. It's a kind of unwholesome samadhi. And once we are either in terms of anger, fighting against someone or trying to take revenge, or once we are really passionately pursuing our desire, it can become a mitra samadhi and you can't see anything else anymore. You only see the enemy, or you only see the object of your desire. And the samadhi, the concentration is so strong that everything else is blotted out. It's obviously an extremely dangerous state, very vulnerable. But this is for how con men are using that. They first give you some prospect of some huge profit, and once they have hooked you and now you want to get this 100,000, they know your mind is so focused on that they can easily con you. Okay, very interesting discussion. And apologies for putting up such a violent video of fighting wallabies, but I hope you all get the lesson from it. Have a look at the Mahataka Sutta. 3 p.m. next session, hopefully in 4 weeks.